I'm Alex High, spelled like Hay, pronounced High, German if you're wondering. I'm a professional certified ADHD coach. The next slide, if it goes, will tell you that. One second. There it goes. I don't know why I have to be back here, but so anyway, I can speak from back here. That's no big deal. But anyway, I'm an author. I have a business called Reset ADHD. I'm an ADHD coach, as I mentioned. What else does my slide say about me? I made the slides, and then my marketing person took over and added some stuff. So I'm a content creator, sleep advocate, apparently. And I have ADHD.
I'll just click from back here.
Okay, sweet. So ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. That's the classification of the DSM. So it's a big fancy word that really means nothing to the average person, but you can see like the definition up there. You can read that. I don't need to read that to you, of what a neurodevelopmental disorder is. But the way I describe it to people is the brain didn't develop the way it normally does. So what that means is the brain is differently wired. There we go. And so there are demonstrable differences between a neurotypical brain and an ADHD brain. They're both functional and structural. So they've done imaging scans of the brain, both while it's working and while it's just sitting there. And they've seen structural differences, and then the way it performs is actually different. So it's differently wired, but it's not defective. That's important to note, because a lot of people hear ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They pay attention to that last D, disorder. Is it a disorder? Technically, yes. But it's just a different brain wiring is the kind way of saying it. And the disorder, the struggles, come from being in a world that wasn't built for that type of brain. So it's not about being broken, being defective. It's about having a different brain. And the world is not built for ADHD. So it used to be ADHD and ADD, and then they mixed it all together, and it's now ADHD with 3 different subtypes. So you can have the hyperactive impulsive type, the inattentive type, or the combined type. The hyperactive impulsive type is a lot of external symptoms, fidgeting, moving around, doing different things that are easy to spot. The inattentive type, formerly known as ADD, is a lot harder to spot. It's a lot of internal symptoms as opposed to external. So the student staring at the teacher thinks the student is paying attention, while the student could be thinking about what happened at recess. And then the combined type has symptoms of both. So the key word that a lot of people catch on to with ADHD is attention. And I like to refer to ADHD and attention as the puzzle of the attention, because on the one hand we've got floating attention, on the other hand we've got hyperfocus. Floating attention is paying attention to as many things as possible at once. And scientists say this goes back to the days of humans not being atop the food chain. There's a saber-toothed tiger, you need to pay attention to that. You need to pay attention to where the food is, you need to pay attention to where the water is. You're paying attention to all the things all the time. Hyperfocus, on the other hand, is an intense state of focus. So you're paying attention to one thing and everything else disappears. An example of hyperfocus is I was at an ex-girlfriend's house while we were dating, and there was a crossword puzzle on the table, like a big one, right? So it was challenging. Really got me going because I like puzzles and things like that. So I was focused on the crossword puzzle, and then her family started walking in the room, and I focused on the crossword puzzle. In retrospect, I look back and I go, that was kind of rude. But it was definitely hyper-focus. I did not hit that button. But anyway, and then I forgot to mention the helium balloons, if you saw that one. So floating attention, I feel like my thoughts are helium balloons. And I'm trying to hold on to all my thoughts at a time. And if I can't hold on to it, it disappears because it's a helium balloon, it flies away. The strings that are attached to the helium balloons are slippery. I can't hold on to them, and I have nothing to tie them down to. That's floating attention for me. So we often wonder if it's floating attention or hyperfocus. What it is both. It's a lack of focus regulation. So if I were to rename ADHD, I would keep the initials ADHD because that's the name of my business, and I wouldn't want to change it because that's a whole series of issues. But I would change it to attention dysregulation hyperactivity disorder. Dysregulation, not deficit. Because if you're staring out the window, you're paying attention to something. You may not be paying attention to what you want to be paying attention to. You're paying attention to what's most interesting, most engaging to your brain at that moment. So we often talk about attention, hyperactivity, impulsivity. Those are kind of the three hallmarks of ADHD, but it's so much more. It's not just not being able to focus, being hyper. There are executive function challenges with ADHD. Executive functions are difficult to pin down. Depending on who you talk to, there's a different number of executive functions and different types, specific lists of executive functions, and it gets really frustrating to me. But basically, the way I describe executive functions is those skills that help you get organized and get stuff done. So doing the things you need to do to go from I'm not doing the thing to I've done the thing, which seems really simple, but you have to prepare to do the thing, get started, maintain your focus, avoid distractions, finish the thing, and then clean up afterwards. There's a lot of steps in there, and we'll get into working with people with ADHD later, but you really need to break it down sometimes into those tiny, tiny steps. All right, and then I'm glad that's up there because I might have forgotten to say forgetfulness. It will happen though in this presentation, especially during the question time, because we'll have time for questions. I will start talking and then forget what I'm saying halfway through what I'm saying. Another example of forgetfulness is when I was a kid, my mom would leave the house and then tell me to keep the laundry moving if it was laundry day. So I'd park myself by the TV in the living room right next to the laundry room. I'd hear the timer go off, but the TV show wasn't at a commercial yet, so I was like, I can wait a couple seconds. By the time the commercial came, my head would be elsewhere and I'd forget about the laundry. My mom would come home and get mad at me. It wasn't that I didn't intend to move the laundry forward. I wasn't willfully being disobedient. I just forgot that that's what I was supposed to be doing. And then, emotional dysregulation. So, people with ADHD have trouble regulating their emotions. It's not in the DSM symptomology, but it should be, because it's in the literature. Talk to anyone who studies ADHD, you're going to find that. And emotions can get so intense that they lead to what's called rejection-sensitive dysphoria. That's not an official medical term. It's not in any diagnostic manual. It was coined by a medical doctor to describe the intense feelings around rejection that people with ADHD feel. trying to think of an example like, oh yeah, perfect example. If I don't hear from a friend for a while, the questions that come to my mind are, why did they hate me? Or what did I do? And I didn't do anything, they're just busy, you know? But those are the kind of distortions that come into my mind because I have this sensitivity to rejection. And then alongside that, the emotional dysregulation, we've also got comorbid conditions, so conditions that occur alongside ADHD. I saw a statistic a few years ago that said people with, roughly half of everyone with ADHD has something else. Anxiety, depression, OCD, what have you. In my experience working with people with ADHD, meeting people with ADHD, being a part of the ADHD community, that number is probably higher than half. So it's very common to have something other than ADHD. And then, lastly, social struggles. When you get a new friend, you're very excited about the new friend, so you hyper-focus on the friend, and then after a bit, the newness wears off, and you forget about the friend. You go on to the new hyperfixation. Well, that friend goes, well, they don't like me anymore. Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna go make friends with other people, and then you lose that friend. It's hard to even make friends in the first place because of the way you interact with the world when you have ADHD. You don't read the room as well. You don't have the same social skills as everyone else. So that causes a social struggle. People see you as different. They don't want to be your friend. You can even go into romantic relations, same thing. When you first start dating someone, you get really excited, then the newness wears off, and you move on to someone else. So I always, when I talk about what ADHD is, I like talking about what ADHD is not, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there. I'm sure we've all heard people say, well, we're all a little ADHD, or sometimes I think I have ADHD. Those little jokes aren't helpful, because ADHD needs to be taken seriously. Dr. Russell Barkley, one of the top researchers on ADHD, who's sadly retired now, did a study and found that there's a 13-year drop in life expectancy with ADHD. And if you have a certain gene, that life expectancy drop goes to 20. Now, that sounds really bad, but it's okay, because when the aspects of life expectancy calculation that go into studying that and coming up with a number, though the characteristics of ADHD that cause that drop are malleable, meaning if we treat ADHD, we give people the support they need, we can raise that life expectancy, and we don't have that severe drop. And then the other thing that makes ADHD not casual is the millions and millions and millions of economic costs. Big one is lost productivity in the workplace. If we don't give people the right environment, they're not as productive, and we lose out on the productivity. And there's economic costs that go into it, calculations that are over my head. But and then we've also got other costs. So there's a high correlation between ADHD and crime. So housing criminals in prisons and jails, that takes up money. We've also got, car accidents that happen because people are distracted behind the wheel. Lots of different things that can happen, and that adds up and adds up and adds up into millions of dollars. ADHD is not caused by food, bad parenting, or technology. Sugar is not going to cause ADHD. Bad parenting is not going to cause ADHD. And technology doesn't cause ADHD. Now, I gave this presentation a little bit ago, and someone raised their hand and said, there are studies that say technology and screens are reducing our attention span, and that's true. However, it's not a causal relationship with ADHD, and because we saw on the other slide, there's more than just attention with ADHD. So, yes, screens can lower our attention span, but it's not causing ADHD. Does that make sense? I'm getting nods. Good. ADHD is not fake or made up by pharmaceutical companies. As I mentioned at the top, we've done studies, the brain is actually different. And then it's not an excuse. I want to do the thing. Like I want to pay my bills on time, but I paid it 2 days ago, June 4th, instead of May 31st, because I forgot. Or I kept saying, I'll do that later, but then later never gets here. So it's not an excuse. I don't want a grace period, because if I keep getting grace periods, well, I'm never going to do the thing. So it's not an excuse. People with ADHD can do great things, and they have. There's a long list of celebrities with ADHD who are doing cool things. ADHD is not a children's issue. It persists into adulthood almost all the time. Some people don't have as severe symptoms as an adult, but what we're seeing is as people with ADHD get older, they get more inattentive, they get more forgetful. And then we don't really have many studies on ADHD in senior citizens. So that's an area of exploration for us. And then boys get diagnosed with ADHD more often than girls, but women and girls get ADHD just as often as boys and men do. And the reason girls don't get diagnosed as much, we speculate, is because they're more prone to get the inattentive type, which, as I mentioned, has the internal symptoms and less noticeable. And the other thing is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So the boys who are causing trouble in school, they're the ones that get the attention. They're the ones that get the diagnosis. I have the inattentive type of ADHD. So I was the kid staring at the teacher, but not paying attention at all. I didn't get diagnosed until I was 20. And then lastly, ADHD is not fixable. It's not curable. We, generally speaking, if someone says, here, take these vitamins and your ADHD will be gone, generally that person has a financial interest in selling those vitamins. I won't mention names, but there's a very famous doctor who gets a lot of financial benefit from his solutions for ADHD. And then it's a different brain wiring. We can't go in and change how the brain is wired. So it's not fixable. Nor do I want it to be. I kind of enjoy having ADHD because there's some good sides to it. Yes. That transition worked well. So the flip side of ADHD. ADHD can be good. And I'm not saying it's magical, because it's going to be a tough life if you have ADHD, because again, the world is not wired for our brains. However, there are flip sides to it. So impulsivity can be creativity. One of the top ADHD doctors in the world, Dr. Ned Hallowell, author of the book Delivered from Distraction, or co-author I should say, says that creativity is just impulsivity gone right. So when we are getting ideas and acting on them, they can be very creative, they can be really good. Inattention can be hyper-focus, right? So if you're not paying attention to what you quote-unquote should be paying attention to, you can hyper-focus and really dive into that thing that's interesting to you. What's interesting gets the attention in ADHD. And then hyperactivity, you're spontaneous, you're energetic, you're the life of the party. People like you. So that's my little explanation of what ADHD is. We're going to move more into managing it, treating it, how we can support those with ADHD.
You keep saying that there's functional and structural differences. Can you tell me if that's diagnostic at all?
What I can tell you is brain scans are expensive.
ADHD is expensive too.
Yes. So a lot of doctors won't do the brain scan, and you can't really tell just by, oh, you've got this abnormality in the brain, this shape of the brain, bam, you've got ADHD. What you can do is look at the traits a person is exhibiting and then make a diagnosis. Does that make sense?
Well, some, but I haven't heard that it's been diagnostic.
Yeah, I haven't heard that it's diagnostic looking at the brain shape, but they find a person that's been diagnosed with ADHD, then they look at their brain.
Right, and they can find some differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that, but people are always asking for the special test that confirms I have ADHD, and it's more complicated.
It's more complicated than that, because it's a series of traits that we call ADHD. Cool. We're on the same page, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And then when we're managing ADHD, we need to remember that everyone is unique. No one person experiences ADHD in the same way. So I like to say everyone has their own flavor of ADHD. And then, so in managing ADHD, you have to find what works for you. And I refer to that as the Burger King principle. Because they used to have a slogan, have it your way. Well, with ADHD, you have to manage it your way. So what we're looking at when we're looking at managing ADHD is a multimodal approach, a combination of different approaches. Pills don't teach skills, as they say. Pills only level the playing field. And yeah, so we're looking for a combination of approaches. Medication can be helpful, but it's not the end-all be-all. So speaking of medication, let's talk about medication. I'm not a doctor, so direct all medical questions to a doctor. But I do want to say that medication can be very helpful. I say can be because it doesn't work for everyone. There's like 20 to 30% of the ADHD population where medication just doesn't work. And then, but it can work because it's been proven that it reduces the severity of ADHD symptoms. Doesn't take them away entirely, but it reduces the symptoms, and no other intervention does that, that we know of. But the tricky thing with ADHD medication is there's no guidance on what will work for whom. So I started on Adderall. That seemed to help a little bit, but I felt like I could do more, so I switched to Concerta, and that helps me better. There was no test they could do to prove which one would work better for me. So it's a guessing game. You have to experiment with medication. And we've got stimulants, non-stimulants, and within the stimulants you've got different formulations, methylphenidate, amphetamine, and they have different delivery mechanisms. For example, the medication I'm on, Concerta, the pill is a pill, obviously, and then it's got a little hole drilled in the top, and then it's got what's called an osmotic pump, and then throughout the day the medication is pumped out of a capsule, and it releases throughout the day and not just all at once. Very cool, but also very expensive, because the company that makes Concerta has a patent on that osmotic pump, and generics can't replicate that. So the generics for Concerta aren't typically as good. So I have to pay a little bit extra out of pocket just so I can afford the medication that works best for me. Side effects. Another reason why ADHD medication might not work. Some people, the side effects are just too bad. Lack of appetite, other things, sleep disruptions, certain things that just make it hard to have the medication in your life. The other thing I want to mention about medication before we move on is that when the pandemic hit, rates of ADHD went up. Rates of ADHD diagnoses went up. I don't believe the rate of ADHD went up. It was just we were diagnosing them more. Which is good because people who needed a diagnosis got one. It's also bad because some people who didn't need a diagnosis got one. There were companies out there with some sketchy diagnostic practices, and they were handing out Adderall like candy. Well, what does that lead to? It leads to shortages. A shortage that persists to this day. We had more demand for ADHD medication, but we did not raise the production. And that's because the production is controlled by the government, and the government hasn't said, let's raise it. My opinion, that the government's the problem, but there was also other factors. It's an oversimplification of the problem, but the point is we're in an ADHD medication shortage. So contact your legislator if you can, please. So coaching. This is what I do when I work with people one-on-one. It's not therapy, but it is life coaching from an ADHD lens. So life coaching isn't what I thought it was when I first got into it. It's not me telling people what to do. It's looking at a person, getting to know them, figure out who they are, what their strengths are, what they really want to do, and how they can use their strengths to overcome their challenges. I like to say it's working with your brain, not against it, and learning how to do that. I was talking to a coach on Tuesday, and he used the word honor. We're honoring the way the brain works. And I just thought that was a lovely way to describe it. So we're not telling people what to do, we're empowering people to do what they would naturally do. The more I talk about coaching and the more I do it, the more I believe that people with